Hi y'all, before we start, I want to warn you that the topics in this episode may be triggering for some listeners. Please read the podcast description for more details. Welcome to Roadie Wellness, where we explore all things health and self-care. Whether you're seeking mental clarity, physical fitness, or insight from students like you, we've got you covered. Alright, hi y'all. Welcome back to the Roadie Wellness Podcast. I'm Olivia Rathbun.
And I'm Kelley Ryan, Coordinator of Violence Prevention Advocacy Services.
And today we're going to be talking about sexual assault, what you can do if you've been impacted by sexual assault, or what you can do for a friend if they've told you they've been impacted by sexual assault. We're just going to go through the basics of it. So to start us off, can you define what sexual assault is?
Sexual assault is a spectrum of behaviors ranging from, and I always break it down this way, someone touching you above or under where your bathing suit covers, all the way up to rape, right? And a lot of people, when they use the word sexual assault, they assume one thing. They assume that means it has to be rape, but understanding it really is a spectrum of behaviors. And anytime someone is sexually assaulted, no matter what the behavior is, it is taken away someone's ability to make a choice about their own body. So I always tell people you don't want to judge your reaction based on, quote unquote, the seriousness of one type of sexual assault versus the other, is that each and every sexual assault has taken away someone's control over their own body.
Mm-hmm. And if someone was just sexually assaulted, what are the options and resources that they have available to them?
Well, here at URI, I think one of the biggest options immediately is, if we're talking about someone who's been sexually assaulted, a lot of times in my role is to know everything that is available. And that can be completely overwhelming for someone who's been sexually assaulted. It is also something that is really complicated. And so I like to break it down simply to students. And so letting students know that we are a survivor-driven campus, and we will never make a student do something they're not comfortable doing or they don't want to do, but we feel like it's important for them to know what is available. So, for example, if someone has just been sexually assaulted and they live in the residence halls, if they go to their RA, the first thing that will happen is the RA will be able to get in touch with their supervisor, and 24 hours a day, they can get in touch with VPAS, my program. But also, health services is a great place to start. Open 7 days a week, Monday through Friday, 8 to 8, on the weekends, 10 to 4. And if a student has been sexually assaulted and they walk in, or you bring your friend in who has been sexually assaulted, you don't even need to make an appointment. You can walk in and receive medical options, right, which range from STI testing, emergency contraception, prophylactic medications to prevent some development of STIs, or even if someone chooses to go to the hospital. In Rhode Island, there are a couple different hospitals that we like to send students to that have SAFE programs. It's a sexual assault forensic exam. It's a different name for each state, but those are exams that typically they need to be done within 96 hours following a sexual assault. And the purpose of that is to preserve evidence. And so if I'm talking to a student who hasn't decided if they want to go to the police, but they think maybe I will down the road, or maybe I'm not sure how I feel right now, is I explain a SAFE exam as a way for them to preserve evidence. Is that down the road, if they change their mind in a year, the evidence that was collected at the hospital will still be able to be, at that point, used when they make a police report. So I view it as a way to keep the door open if they choose to move forward. And then some students, the thought of going to the hospital is overwhelming, and so they may choose to do testing and get medication right through health services because it's most comfortable for them, and it's all they can emotionally manage at the time. Again, the number one thing we want students to feel is supported after they've been sexually assaulted, not feeling as though they're going to be forced to do anything they don't want to do. My role is to talk through those options with the student. And if they want to go to the hospital, we're getting that student to the hospital. And there's a variety of ways. If they want to be treated medically at health services because they feel most comfortable with that, they can be treated medically. Another thing, too, is we want someone to have someone to talk to, right? And so whether that's someone going to counseling center, or there's a statewide victims of crime helpline number. But those and the immediate after effects is really thinking about someone's medical needs and safety, right? Someone feels unsafe, if you're a student here at the university and you've been sexually assaulted and you have safety concerns, calling 911, right, which on campus is URIPD, they will know what to do from there, right, to make sure you feel safe. And I think when I view what's available immediately after a sexual assault, my mind goes to what's needed for medical care, what's needed to make sure a student's safe, and then making sure that their wellness needs in the moment are met. And then from there, after the fact, we talk about reporting options. We talk about whether they want to report to the university, whether they want to report to the police, whether they decide to do one or the other or nothing, right? Another thing, too, is we can then from there talk about supportive measures. But I think in the immediate aftermath, knowing that at any point a student can go to health services, if it's after hours and they want to get in touch, go to an RA, go to a hall director, go to the URI police. And all of those, I think, are really good places to start.
So for anyone who might have just been impacted, the biggest thing you recommend is just going to VPAS, right? Or going to the RA and getting in touch with VPAS, and then you will walk through those options with them in the moment.
Yeah, and knowing, too, that there are confidential resources on campus, and then there are private ones. And I know we've talked about this in a past episode, but knowing that confidential resources are really designed as a safe space for students where they don't have to worry about name being given to the police or the university. And so to repeat that, it's health services, it's the counseling centers on campus, and there are a couple different ones. It is VPAS, and then any of the pastoral services. Everyone else is private. So again, if you go to an RA, you go to someone in the Dean of Students office, you go to even a professor or an academic advisor, someone you've formed a relationship with, they'll keep the information private, but then they'll refer you to a confidential resource.
Yeah, they report up, not out.
Yep.
So they tell their supervisor will report that information usually to VPAS or to the resources that they need. So it's not going to be spread amongst other RAs or other professors or whatever. But it does get reported to higher ups.
Yeah.
And how can a friend support someone who's been impacted by sexual assault if they were just told by their friend that they were sexually assaulted? What can a friend do to help them and support them?
I think thanking your friend for sharing that information and for trusting you, and taking your friend's lead, which means I always say the basic needs immediately are for someone to feel safe and someone to feel supported right after they tell someone they've been sexually assaulted. And so, taking a deep breath before you respond, knowing that it's not appropriate to ask questions. It's not appropriate to want to know the details. That makes no difference. What you want is your friend to know that you believe them, that you support them, and that you are willing to do what they want when it comes to what their next steps are. And so when someone's been impacted by trauma, their brain can kind of go into a shock or a numbness. And so repeating what you know the resources are and asking if they want to go, and even more so is saying, would you like me to walk you, right? Would you like me to go sit with you when we talk to the RA about what to do next? Or I'm happy to walk over to health services with you, go to the counseling center. All of those things I think are huge. And I think not assuming how someone will be. So a lot of people have assumptions that, especially after someone's been sexually assaulted, that they should act away. And what we know is most of the students I work with initially are really shocked. They may feel numb. They may feel like this is surreal. And there's assumption that people will be hysterically crying, right? And typically what we see is someone who's just trying to figure out how to get through the next moment. And so to be a friend, I think that means is understanding that your friend may seem, quote unquote, fine one day and not fine the next. Or they are 19 and even though they're going through this horrific thing, they still want to be 19. So that means they may want you to come over and watch a movie and say, I don't want to talk about it. So you don't talk about it. You go over, watch a movie. Or they still want to go out. And so going out and letting them still be the person they were before, I think is huge. But I think it's important to know that there's no right or wrong way for someone to respond after they've been sexually assaulted. And there's also no right or wrong course or path someone who's been assaulted should take, and that people do it on their own time. And the biggest thing you can do as a friend is support them and believe them and let them know that you're a safe space and that you are there to talk when they want to talk. And when they just want to go to dinner, they just want to go to dinner. Mm-hmm. Or they want to watch a movie, and they still want to feel like they can still have that college experience. Mm-hmm. And again, when someone's ability to feel safe in the world has been disrupted, I always say basic needs. Let's remember that. How's your friend sleeping? Are they eating? And do they feel safe? Making sure eat, sleep, and safe is huge. And that's typically what I do when I first meet with a student is let's focus on what are you going to do today? What are you going to eat? And focus on let's get through each day hour by hour, and breaking it down I think is helpful.
Yeah, those are very good tips for anyone who wants to support their friend. And to reiterate, like not asking questions, I think that's so important because someone might want help, but they might not want to talk about it.
Yep.
Yeah, or they might just want a distraction or someone to walk them to health services, and they'll be ready when they're ready to discuss it.
I always even ask students when they come and see me, is there anyone you want here with you? And if they say yes, and it's even before we bring a friend in, I'll even ask them beforehand, are there any off-limit questions? Just so I don't put them on the spot, making sure someone feels comfortable.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up because that process might be intimidating for some people. Going off of that, what does that appointment look like if someone comes to you or goes to VPAS after they've been impacted by sexual assault? What are some other questions that you may ask them?
So if someone comes into my space because they've been sexually assaulted, for me, I put all my assumptions to the side. And my first order of business, I usually say, is to make that person feel comfortable in my space, right? And asking them, do you need some water? Do you need a support person with you? And then first step is I usually figure out medically. And I don't ask for details of what happened immediately, but I go over the variety of medical options that someone may need after a sexual assault. And at that point, I let the student decide, or some students may respond with, based on the assault, I don't need medical care. And some will say, I'd like to actually see a medical provider today. Or they may say, I don't want to see one today, but can I see one tomorrow? And so my first thing is to really get a sense of what their immediate medical needs are, and knowing, again, that a sexual assault is a spectrum of behaviors. And knowing, too, that if we're within a 96-hour time frame, I want to make sure that they have the opportunity to go to a hospital if that's what they choose to do. And then beyond that, I ask any safety concerns. That's a huge thing is, do you feel safe in your room? Are you worried about this person contacting you again? Will they, or how can they? Do we need to look at different situations of maybe do you have somewhere else to stay? Do you need your room to be moved? And then once we have medical and safety established, it's really wellness. And so who are the supportive people in your lives? Who knows about what's happened? Do you feel comfortable talking to anyone about it? Do you have any counseling already? And within that conversation, I usually talk a little bit about like common reactions to trauma. And from there, really talk about what to look out for. So again, like eating, if you have trouble eating, you have trouble sleeping. I talk about, even in the aftermath, like, what does your schedule look like the rest of the week? Like, if it's Tuesday and someone says, I just want to go home for a couple of days, my job is to help get them home. And I worry about the academic accommodations from there. But it's really trying to gauge how a student is doing without overwhelming them, making sure that their medical needs are met, that they feel safe, and that what are we doing to take care of them for the next couple days, and kind of breaking it down that way. And again, I actually always bring up reporting options. And sometimes students immediately want to report, but a lot of students I work with say, I'm not going to report, or I don't need to talk about that right now. I can't even think about that. And I say, okay, we'll talk about it another time. And so taking their lead.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you for going over that. And to switch topics a little bit, what are some common responses, feelings, emotions, behaviors that someone who was just sexually assaulted might feel or exhibit that they could expect or their friends could expect? You touched on that earlier, but are there any others?
I've seen a range of behaviors. Most common, what I see is a sense of shock, a sense of maybe shame, embarrassment, a lot of confusion around what they want to do or who they want to tell. And I think this kind of feeling of like, this is surreal, this is out of body, can't believe this is happening. And I always tell students I'm working with that the numbness and that shutdown is your brain's and body's way of protecting you in the first couple days, which is allowing you to get through the motions and maybe keeping you a little bit numb so you can get through some of the things that you kind of have to do immediately after. And I usually tell people, too, that I have some students I meet with and they are like, oh, I actually feel fine. And I always say, that's okay. And this is what it may look like if you start not feeling fine, right? Or if you start getting nervous by yourself when maybe you weren't, or, talk about nightmares or trouble eating and sleeping are some of the biggest things that I see afterwards. But really knowing that there is, like I always say this, but there's no right way to respond. Typically what I see are students who are kind of numb and shocked, students who may feel like maybe they're depressed or they're really questioning their sense of safety is typically what I see.
Mm-hmm. And like you said before, people still might want to go out and party, or they might not want to, or that might change based later on.
Some people want a distraction immediately. Some people want to go out and try to, you don't forget about it, but somewhat forget about what's happened, or be able to still be quote unquote normal or feel like they used to feel. Those are common statements I hear a lot.
Mm-hmm. I hear a lot about people or victims who are impacted who may feel some sort of shame or regret from like fighting back or not fighting back, depending on the degree of sexual assault.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things when I talk to students is they're afraid of how people are going to react. Are people going to believe them? Are people going to not believe them? Are people going to treat them differently? Whether that's parents, whether that's friends, whether that's siblings, etc., is people fear of being seen differently, treated differently. But I also think, too, that there's a fear of being shunned by peers. There's a fear of impacting others when you report what's happened. I also think a lot of students I work with, maybe the most common reaction to sexual assault, people always hear like fight or flight. When we talk about sexual assault, freezing is the most common response to a sexual assault. Again, I always explain it as your brain's way of allowing you to survive something terrible. And I think people struggle with the fact that they feel as though they should have done more. They should have been fought back, or they should have been able to stop what was happening. But I always say you did the best you could in the moment. And whatever you did during that moment allowed you to just be here today. But yeah, all those feelings I think are come and go a lot at the beginning for a student.
Yes, and just because someone may have not, or like regret not fighting back, that doesn't mean that it was their fault in any way.
Absolutely.
Correct? Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's making sure everyone I meet with understands it's never their fault. And it's also not their job to get the person in trouble. It's the job of those around the person who hurts others to say something. If they know if there's someone in their friend group who is hurting others, guess what? It's not up to the person I'm working with to end that student's behavior. It should be the peers around them stepping forward and saying that this is not acceptable on our campus.
Mm-hmm. And it's the fault of the person who committed the sexual assault.
Absolutely.
In the first place. So
yeah, I always ask people, I have always asked this question is, where do you want to be in 5 years? And they'll usually say, say they're in nursing school, they'll say, I want to be a nurse. And I'll say, what do you need to do today to ensure in 5 years you're a nurse? And for a lot of students, that means I don't think I can report this right now, or I think I just need my medical needs met and mental health and focus on that. And I always say that's the goal for me, is to allow someone to be where they want to be in 5 years. Yeah.
Thank you for all that information. It's very important. Is there anything else that you want to add, or any other information you want to promote?
No, I think it's just this, ensuring that we have a community that believes and supports survivors of sexual violence, and that we take ownership of it as a community, which is if we see someone who's hurting others, is we say something. We don't ignore that behavior. And the more we choose not to ignore that behavior, the less of that behavior we will see.
Before we wrap up, a quick reminder that all information shared in today's podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. Thank you for listening to another episode of Roadie Wellness. If you like what you heard today, tune in every Tuesday on all podcast platforms for more. If you want to stay up to date on events and healthcare tips, please follow us at URI Health Promotions on Instagram. And if you have any ideas for future podcast episodes or more social media content that you'd like to see, please feel free to DM us or email us. Until next time, take care and stay healthy.